The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, I should say, in Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us for today's review of the Wisconsin Energy Code 2015, the SPS 363 overview of the Commercial Energy Code. This program is being brought to you by Clean Wisconsin, Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition, MEA, NBI, and Slipstream. And my name is Bill Dieters. I work for PSD Consulting. We are the firm that is going to be providing the training over the first half of the 2025. In the background, I have two of my colleagues, Andrew Wilbur and Robert Oakley, having a little bit of an issue with GoToWebinar today. They're not able to join via voice, but if anything comes up, hopefully they'll be able to assist with any problems. If you have issues today with audio, you can log in on your phone, but please stay logged in via computer so that we can monitor your attendance. There are two handouts that are included in the presentation, a slide deck of the entire presentation and a handout regarding program that this falling under with the Wisconsin Technical Advisor Program. If you have questions, please put those in the questions pane. If we don't have time to get to those today or during the 60-minute session, I will answer those this afternoon at the end of the session because we're going to be really tight on time with the content that we have. So any questions you enter in there, I'll be able to access those and get those questions answered for you. And also the training today is being recorded. And you'll be distributed a link following the end of the seminar with your certificate. So you'll be able to download that for future reference. The Wisconsin Energy Technical Advisor Program is what this is part of. The website is www.wienergycodes.com. When you go to that website, you can find out additional information regarding the services that the Wisconsin Energy Codes Program is going to be putting on, including these virtual presentations as well as in person. We'll be conducting job sites visits, allowing one-on-one or small group consultations, and we can help with energy-related questions. We'll have a hotline coming up soon that you'll be able, in the next slide or two, that you'll be able to direct your energy code-related questions to us, and we can maybe help you with interpreting that. We can't issue a official code interpretation because obviously that's up to the authority having jurisdiction, but we can assist you with that. Robbie Oakley or Robert Oakley, R. Oakley at psdconsulting.com is the field contact in Wisconsin. So you can feel free to contact him at any time to discuss any questions or needs that you may have, maybe set up training as needed, or to find out more information about the program. This slide will be at the end of the presentation as well, so it's in your slide deck, the two phone numbers for Robbie Oakley and myself. You can either call us or email us. Our support would be via a written email typically within 24 hours of you asking a question, submitting a question. If we are able to assist you with that, but one way or another, somebody will be back in contact with you. As I said before, this is being presented by PSD or Performance System Development. We are a company that works with energy efficiency, and this is our motto or slogan, moving energy efficiency forward, combining building science with technology to help utility program or companies, program implementers, and building performance professionals achieve energy savings. Additional information about PSD can be found at psdconsulting.com, on LinkedIn, and also on YouTube. My name is Bill Dieters, as I mentioned, Senior Technical Specialist. I will be presenting the programs to you. Robert Oakley is also a Senior Technical Specialist. He's also our field representative in Wisconsin, as I mentioned. He'll be the one that would be reaching out to the various code organizations and or builders and home builders associations and contractors and so forth around the state. So we'll get right into SPS 363, the Energy Conservation Code for Commercial Construction. This should look pretty familiar to folks. These are the changes to the IECC, 2015 IECC. So the changes or omissions, additions or deletions. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of these. I'm sure you know that when you see a subchapter SPS 363.0, if it's prefaced, if a zero follows the period, that's a commercial reference. If it follows with a 5, that would be a residential reference. So as we go through this, when we see 363.052, that means it's referring to additions under the commercial section of the IECC. So subchapter 1, purpose and application. This chapter is designed to regulate the design and construction of the buildings for efficient energy use. Gives you a little bit of flexibility in the way that you approach the construction of the building to achieve that energy efficiency. Again, the chapter is not intended to abridge any safety or health or environmental requirements in other applicable codes. When we look at 363.002 for application, if a building contains both commercial and residential occupancies, each occupancies will be separately considered to meet those applicable code provisions, whether it's commercial or residential. And of course, there are some exempt buildings or structures, and that's mainly has to do with glazed structures or portions of buildings used for production of plant life or maintaining plant life as a primary purpose, or exempt from the building thermal envelope provisions if they are thermally isolated from the remainder of the building. That thermal isolation is what is the key to this, where that greenhouse assembly, if it's totally isolated by or thermally isolated by, say, an exterior wall assembly from the remainder of the structure, it doesn't fall under the requirements of the code for fenestration and insulation requirements. We move on to subchapter 2. This is changes, additions, or omissions to the International Energy Conservation Code. So the next slides are going to be referencing the IECC with the Wisconsin-specific amendments. And we're just going to have a little bit of time to touch on each slide because there's a lot of information in this code. And we will have additional trainings moving forward in the beginning of 2025 to touch on mechanical systems in commercial buildings, lighting requirements, thermal envelope, things like that, to expand upon some sections of this code. So again, changes, additions, omissions to the IECC are specified in this subchapter, 363.0100, in our rules of the department, not requirements of the IECC. So it's important to understand that these are amendments to that code. When we look at the administration and enforcement, you'll see that chapters C101, 103 through 109 are not included in the code, so they were exempted. So if you have just the 2015 IECC code, you need to know what the amendments are. You can't read that straightforward as taking it as being the required.
Hey, Bill, I don't think you're sharing your screen.
How about that? Nobody said anything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, and
you're sharing your presenter slides.
Of course it would be.
Still presenter slides.
Yep. Thanks for letting me know. I'm not sure what is going on with this time. There we go. How's that?
There we go.
Okay, I apologize, folks. I severely apologize for that. These chapters are going to be covered in that handout, so please download that PDF outline or the handout that's in the download section or handout section of your GoToWebinar navigation screen. Again, I sincerely apologize for that. And we're going to continue going forward because I don't want to really backtrack. If there's questions at the end, we can come back to those first 5 or 6 slides. So there's some general definition changes and some modified definitions. And as you know, within the code, there's a section for definition, chapter on definitions. One of the specific definitions talks about the effective aperture of windows, the visible transmission area. One of the other substitutions is a word called approved, and that just means acceptable to the department. So be careful about the definitions. You always look at that section to find out what the true meaning is. But if there are substitutions, additions, or deletions from the code with SPS 363, just be leery of that and look for those changes. So we don't want to get you confused with that. Daylight responsive control is another item that has a different definition, and that'll reference the section C502.2.2.2 light reduction controls. And just be careful again on the wording. There's some wording at the end of the section of this definition that has changed from the IECC definition of a daylight responsive control. Again, this is just a quick overview of how some things may be changed in reference to SPS 363. So in addition to the requirements of Section 302, which are exterior design conditions, there is a specific table within the SPS 363 for our exterior design temperatures used for heating and cooling. And that would be found in the supplement within the SPS 363 document. So be aware that there is a specific table for outdoor design temperatures based on the counties of Wisconsin. As we move on through to SPS 363.030, this gets into material systems and equipment. These are, again, department rules in addition to the requirements of the 2015 IECC section C303. Again, information on thermal properties of materials should follow ASHRAE handbook fundamentals. And if it's not available, if there's no documentation within ASHRAE, then it should be obtained from laboratory or field test measurements. And we get into some different types of commercial construction. That may be the only way to provide the information needed that the assembly would meet the building thermal envelope requirements. Get into section on foam plastics and integrated concrete masonry systems that they're going to be evaluated independently under respective samples. Excuse me. We also have default values as approved by departments on any type of concrete or masonry units. We're providing laboratory or test results to provide those U factors for those wall assemblies. We get into the requirements of insulation within section 303, C303.1.1. This doesn't differ from the residential code where insulation markers 12 inches, insulation greater than 12 inches or wider need to have their thermal identification mark visible. Blown or sprayed foam insulation is required to have measurements, rulers throughout the roof area. That's going to tell us what the depth of that insulation is. And again, these insulating materials need to be installed so that the manufacturer's R value mark is observable upon inspection. Again, all outlined in section C303. We move on to fenestration ratings. Windows or fenestration, doors, windows, skylights are all required to meet NFRC 100 or have a label. It should be a labeled product. If they are not labeled, if they don't have the label, we need to follow one of the default fenestration charts that are, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. Excuse me. So we have default fenestration U factors. We have default door U factors, and we have default SHGC fenestration for fenestration. So if we don't have an FRC label, we need to default to these values. Again, doors and windows fenestration should be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, as well as the IBC, the construction side of the code. And as in residential construction, exposed foundation insulation, needs to have a protective covering applied to the exterior, and in this case, extending 6 inches below grade. Some of the additional requirements of C401, we want to make sure that this is getting more into equipment now, where we're going to start talking about design loads and economizers, lighting equipment, dual switching, things like that. Automatic receptacle controls are not included as part of this chapter. And when we look at monitoring equipment, there's a new definition for monitoring where we substitute the wording of as a measurement device should be installed in new buildings to monitor total electrical use. For buildings with tenants, that total electrical use should be monitored for total building or for each individual tenant. We're going to get a little more in detail on some of these items as we go through here with some of the other exemptions and changes. So chapter 4, we'll get into the building compliance. So commercial buildings should comply with one of the following, either a ANSI ASHRAE ISA 90.1 requirements of section 402 through 405, C405, or the requirements of sections 4025, 4032, 404, 4052, 4053, 4054, 4056, and C407 total building performance. And that gives us that total energy cost to be equal or less than the standard reference design. So 3 methods of compliance: your ComCheck, prescriptive, or the total building performance. Excuse me. C402 talks about building thermal envelope requirements. We know the state has 2 climate zones, Zone 6 and Zone 7. Now, when we look at the code, a 2015 IECC stock code is written, the tables have been changed and renamed. They were substituting the 2009 IECC tables, 502 or table 502.2 parentheses 1 for the C402.1.3 table as it existed in the 2015 code, published in the 2015 code. It's also renumbered to that same section. See set table number 402.1.3. So opaque assemblies. So if we have opaque element, the U factors, the same thing. There's a new table that was substituted, or the table was substituted from the 2009 IECC in place of the published 2015 code. So just be very certain that you're looking at the appropriate fenestration tables. And this is just an example of those tables. We have the opaque assemblies where we have our U values, and we have our equivalent or maximum U factors. And these are those substituted tables from 2009. Keep in mind that with the order tables, the climate zones go across the top of the table, and the specific building components come down the left-hand column. So if we're looking at climate zone 6 and 7, be across the top, and then we can get our building components down the left-hand side. Here's the fenestration prescriptive table for fenestration, just showing the same thing where we have, again, the climate zones across the top, product description down the left-hand side. We go through. We talk about fenestration in section 402.1. There's a maximum vertical fenestration in the code that's written, so not more than 30% of the gross above grade wall area will be fenestration. And skylight area cannot be greater than 3% of the gross roof area. We can increase the fenestration by section 402.4.1.1 in areas that have daylight responsive Controls. We'll touch on that a little bit more, and we will get into that in depth in the commercial lighting program that we will have available after the first of the year. So in climate zones 1 through 6, so it's only pertaining to zone 6, Wisconsin, no more than 40% of the gross above grade wall area shall be permitted to be vertical fenestration, provided there are numerous requirements with daylight responsive controls and that they are met. We can also increase our skylight area with the daylight responsive controls, and we can go to 5% with that. And within the code itself, see the maximums. This is a excerpt from the code where we can increase to 5% when we have the proper daylight zones, daylighting controls of the lighting system within the structure. There's always some exceptions to watch for in ways that we can increase certain areas or certain things within the construction or the energy efficiency of the building. There are minimum skylight fenestration requirements. You can see this is on a 2,000 or 500 square feet or greater floor area, and it gets to break down directly under a roof, where not more than 75% of that ceiling area is a height greater than 15 feet and used as office or lobby corridors, so forth. All those areas should be provided with one of the following: either minimum skylight area to the daylight zone under that area, which is at 3%, or that minimum skylight effective aperture of at least 1%, and that's in accordance with the equation that's found in this chapter. So again, we need just to make sure that of the requirements when we have the skylights, what we can exceed and what we have to follow as published. Excuse me. So we're going to talk a little bit about building thermal envelope currently. The building needs to be sealed. As we know, we want to limit the infiltration or exfiltration of the structure. So we don't want to introduce unconditioned air into the building or lose what we already have conditioned, whether it's heated or cold. We have to ensure that the materials are properly sealed. And when we have different materials, that they are sealed in such a fashion and with a product that allows for that differential expansion or contraction of the materials. So there's a list of materials or areas within a building that need to be caulked or gasketed, weather stripped, or sealed with an air barrier material. It's a suitable film or a solid material. And some of these areas are all joints or seams or penetrations. So anything that penetrates the building thermal envelope, we need to seal. If we have a pipe penetrating a wall, we need to make sure that it's sealed. Site-built doors, windows, skylights goes without question, knowing that they're sealed. Openings between door and window assemblies. So between the window unit or door unit itself and the jamb, that gap around needs to be air sealed. Utility penetrations. We have chases and drop ceilings, knee walls within unconditioned attic spaces, walls and ceilings separating garages from conditioned spaces, areas behind tubs, showers, or other items on exterior walls, common walls between dwelling units, any access into attic spaces, whether it's pull down stairs or lift out panels or doors that swing, any type of rim joist construction or other sources of infiltration. So penetrations or other areas that any air can come into the structure need to be sealed. And so as this is in the code is written, so we need to follow this air sealing. And by introducing air sealing, hopefully we can mitigate and lessen the amount of air leakage into and out of the structure. Which that brings us to the air sealing and insulation chapter for section 402.5.1 on building air tightness or building envelope air tightness. So there are two testing options that we can do by the code for C402.5.1.1, and that's a building envelope testing, where we test the air leakage, no less than 7 ACH or 7 air changes per hour. Or we could follow the visual inspection option, C402.5.2. And the chart on the right-hand side are those items that need to be visually inspected. And once they are verified and deemed acceptable, then you meet the air sealing requirements of the code. So again, we can test from a blower door test where we're pressurizing the building or depressurizing the building to find out the air leakage, or we can follow the visual inspection option. Section 402.5.3 talks about rooms containing fuel burning appliances, and this addresses how those rooms need to be sealed, that the doors fully gasketed, water lines of those areas are installed in accordance with section 403. Our combustion air ducts have to be insulated if they pass through a conditioned space, so forth. So there are certain requirements when we have fuel burning appliances, say within mechanical closets. There's some exceptions and different parts of the different requirements apply to this point. And you can see there are some exceptions. You have direct vent appliances with both intake and exhaust installed continuous to the outside. So a direct vent furnace where the intake and the exhaust both go to outside. And fireplaces or stoves that comply with the IMC or the IBC section of the code. So just be aware that there are additional requirements when we have those to provide combustion air openings and separate those spaces or those appliances from other areas of the dwelling. There are also sections in the code that pertain to shafts or chutes, stairways, elevator lobbies, making sure that those doors are gasketed properly, weather stripped, or sealed. We have air intakes, making sure that those air intakes or exhaust openings, that they're integral to the building envelope, and have dampers in accordance with C403.2.4.3 that will allow that airflow to be shut off. And of course, we have loading docks, cargo doors, roll-up doors, so forth. Those doors need to be weather sealed that restrict infiltration. When a vehicle is parked in the doorway, when that truck or trailer is backed into that overhead door, the loading dock door, they need to be sealed to restrict any type of infiltration into that space. Again, we can get further into this when we get into the 3-hour program on the commercial building thermal envelope. Vestibules are required, and there are exceptions. Now, I'm not going to run through all these exceptions, but when we have building entrances need to be protected by an enclosed vestibule, with some exceptions to those spaces. And you can look at those exceptions when you get the slide packet, but just be aware that there are exceptions to the requirements of a building vestibule. Recessed lighting. Now, that's similar to residential. The recessed lighting needs to be insulation contact rated. It has to be rated to have an air leakage not more than 2 CFM, and that should be on that product. And again, sealed to the sealing material with a gasket or caulked so that we don't have any air infiltration or leakage between the conditioned space and the unconditioned attic above, or unconditioned space above. I know that was a real quick overview of the building thermal envelope. Again, we have other programs that go deeper in detail, but I wanted to be able to touch on most of the sections of the code today just to give you that quick overview and to get some ideas as to what you may desire for additional training, where we can develop a program based on a particular chapter or area of the code if we don't already have that completed. Excuse me. So 403.2.1 talks about the calculations of heating and cooling loads. Okay. So it's required that you meet ANSI ASHRAE ACA standard 183 or an approved equivalent formula or procedure, but it all comes back to the tables with the outdoor design temperatures that we showed back earlier in section 303. The equipment sizing and system shall be provided or sized to provide the minimum sized equipment to meet the loads anticipated. So no oversizing of equipment, making sure that we get those size to provide that minimum system calculation. Again, looking at as a size in accordance with the heating and heating and cooling temperatures in the earlier chapter. There are efficiency requirements. These tables are rather extensive when you look at section 403.2.3. So they need to meet the heating efficiency requirements of tables 403.2.2 parens 1 through parens 9. So it's a rather large section encompassing all types of heating and cooling equipment, making sure that we meet those categories, the equipment type, the categories, the size, the efficiency as we go through as a requirement for the commercial code, the commercial energy conservation code. And as always, each heating and cooling system shall be provided with thermostatic controls. One thing that we want to make sure that you pay attention to specifically on the tables or any type of footnote. As we can see with the test procedure, there's footnote A. And make sure you pay attention to the specific title of that table, because there are so many tables that are available. We want to ensure that we're looking at the right equipment, referencing the right table, for the correct table for the equipment that's been specified or that's being desired to be placed within the structure. SPS 363.0403 talks about building mechanical systems. So HVAC system controls. I talked earlier in the previous slide that each shall be provided with a thermostatic control. And underneath this section, there are various subsections talking about off-hour controls, shut-off dampers, snow and ice melt system controls, freeze protection, and economizer fault detection diagnostic systems. Again, we go deeper into all of those sections in the course on mechanical or commercial mechanical equipment. Just be aware that they removed sections. Wisconsin had removed section C403.2.4 from the code. So there's no reference to that. And it will be, if you have the version of the Wisconsin amended IECC, that section will be removed. But back to those subsections, again, there are some rather lengthy subsections on HVAC controls. And again, we'll get further into detail in that commercial application or the commercial mechanical equipment program that'll be coming up. We have hot water outdoor boiler temperature setback controls section, making sure that we have those systems in place that lower the boiler temperature based on the outdoor temperature if we have a boiler heating system. We have mechanical ventilation requirements, C403.2.6, and those need to follow Chapter 4 of the International Mechanical Code. We have some additional subsections under 403.2.4 for demand control ventilation was amended, and they're added enclosed parking garage ventilation controls. ERVs, energy recovery ventilation systems, are talked about in section 403.2.7. It's where the supply airflow of a fan system exceeds the values in the tables listed 403.2.7 parens 1 or parens 2. Those systems are then required to have an energy recovery system. And I don't want to go too deep into that right now, but just be sure to note the exceptions and any footnotes, again, that are on the requirements for ERVs. Duct and plenum insulation and sealing. It's required that supply and return ducts be insulated to a minimum of R6 when they're located in unconditioned spaces. If those ducts are outside of the building, they need to be a minimum of R12 in climate zone 6 and 7, which is Wisconsin. And when located within the building thermal envelope assembly, that duct or plenum should be separated from the building exterior unconditioned or exempt spaces by a minimum of R12 in climate zone 6 or 7. So if we have that duct running up an exterior wall, we need to make sure we have that separation between the duct is adjoining an unconditioned attic. We need to have that R12 insulation. And you see that again, there are exceptions where they're located within the equipment itself, or if that design temperature, that ductwork between interior and exterior of the duct or plenum's difference is not greater than 15 degrees. As with the residential code, all ducts, air handlers, filter boxes need to be sealed, and it needs to fall in line with section 603.9 of the International Mechanical Code. So any seams within the ductwork, connections, all that needs to be properly sealed so that we have air delivery as intended. Ductwork should be constructed and erected in accordance with the IMC or International Mechanical Code. Piping insulation. There's a requirement specifically for piping insulation, depending upon whether it's steam, hot water, or chilled water. Again, table 403.2.10 gives you that insulation requirement based on the nominal pipe diameter. Moving on to mechanical systems, when we go to further through mechanical systems, we get to C403.3. It's economizers. And this is just one example of the economizer section. You can have air economizers, water side economizers, and so forth. This chapter is rather lengthy. And this is just, again, just an excerpt from that. When we talk about the air supply economizers, should be provided on this cooling systems of all package rooftop units, in this example, or other cooling systems greater than 54,000 BTUs, with certain caveats or additional requirements with that. So we want to make sure that we look at the right section based on the type of economizer. And again, we'll get further into that in the specific mechanical program. There is a retitled table. 403.3 parens 1 is now titled Minimum Building Chilled Water System Cooling Capacity for determining economizer cooling requirements. That can be found in SPS 363-0403, that passage. So they retitled that section of that table. Again, we'll get deeper into economizers and the functionality of those whenever we get into the commercial mechanical equipment. There's additional substitution made in section C403.4.2.3.2.2, and that's the climate zone 6 and 7 as indicated in the corresponding figure C301 in table 3 C301 regarding open circuit cooling towers. So just be certain that you look at that wording. This section was reworded with the SPS 363. This pertains to heat rejection under hydronic system controlling, or hydronic systems control. So just make sure we look for those substitutions. Again, I can't stress that enough, to make sure that you have the amended version of the 2015 IECC to reference, or you know which sections correspond with SPS 363, so that the changes, revisions, deletions, or alterations are corresponding, and you don't get confused on a few of the items. Now, there are sections that were deleted from the IECC. This is a fairly big one: mechanical systems commissioning. The requirements of IECC 2015 chapter C40 or section C403.2.11 are not included in SPS 361 through 366. Walk-in coolers as well. The sections 403.215 and 403.216 are not included. And boiler turndown requirements. These are some pretty significant items that are taken out of, were not included in the code, so just be aware of that. That these are sections that are not part of the code. Time switches are not included as part of the chapter when it comes to service water heating. Heat traps are also not included. So that would have been under C404.3. Pools and spas are also not included in the chapter. So knowing that these amendments or deletions to the IECC in section 404 have occurred, just again, be aware of that, needing to reference both the SPS document as well as the IECC code. Moving on a little bit further in the code, we talk about circulation systems. Again, there is the section of the code, the heat water circulation system should be provided with a circulation pump, obviously, and it goes on to further define what that circulation system is. But there's also a portion of the IECC 2015 code that was amended or deleted. C404.11 or 0.11 is not part of the code. Again, be careful when you're looking at service hot water system, and that's service hot water system commissioning, and that's again not required to be completed as part of the current code. 405 pertains to electrical power and lighting. We also offer a session on external or commercial lighting systems and power allowances and power factors determination. And this is as the amended code is written. Any area in closed space greater than 250 square feet has a lighting density more than 0.6 watts per square foot. So have have at least one control that meets all of the following: able to control luminaires in daylight zones, controls at least 50% of those lamps or luminaires in a daylight zone. And that falls in conjunction with C405.2.3, which would be under the daylight zoning requirements. There are some exceptions, as with everything within the code, and they don't apply to certain areas. As you can see with the daylight zones where the effective aperture of the glazing is less than 0.1 for vertical or 0.01 for horizontal, and where those adjacent structures or natural objects obstruct daylight zones. So if we have buildings closer together, one building shields certain areas from sunlight that we're not affecting the daylight area or daylight zoning, then there are some requirements that we can follow. As you can see, there is a substitution for the voltage line track plugs within this section, and this is on permanently installed factory equipment. So again, make sure we follow that substitution of the code in section 405 for wattage aligned voltage lighting track lighting. Lighting controls shall be provided, or lighting system shall be provided with controls as specified in C402.2.2, 0.3, 4, and 5. And that gets deeper into how the lighting control is required for certain areas, along with the daylighting requirements and so forth. Now, these lighting controls are not required for areas designated as security or emergency areas. They are required to be continuously lighted. We don't want to be able to shut the lighting off in those areas. Interior exit stairways, interior exit ramps, exit passages need to be fully lit at all times, and emergency egress lighting that is normally off are not required to be on these switches. This also tells us that Section 405.2.1 is not included in the SPS 361 to 366. Again, another section that is omitted from the code. Time switch controls. This is section 405, as we talked about. Each building that is not provided with occupant sensor controls must have a time switch control to turn lights off automatically, with the following exceptions: spaces where patient care is provided, spaces where automatically shut off lighting would endanger occupancy safety or security, any area that's intended for continuous operation, or any type of shop and laboratory classroom. So time sensor, occupant sensor controls are required except for in those areas. These time switch control functions, as found in 405.2.1, shall have override switching that complies with the following. So that this device should have a minimum of a 7-day clock, be capable of 7 different settings, for the 7 days of the week, incorporate that automatic holiday shutoff feature, which turns that lighting off for at least 24 hours and it resumes its normal schedule. Be programmable and have backup capabilities in case the power is interrupted. Include an override switch that's a manual control that reverts back to the programming after 2 hours. And those individual switches don't control lighting for areas greater than 5,000 square feet. And you'll have to refer to the code section for the list of exceptions because it was rather lengthy. So time switch control function is significant for lighting within the commercial buildings, as well as our light reduction controls as outlined in section 405.2.2. Again, this is something that the light reduction controls must allow the occupant to reduce the connected lighting load. As you can see, there are different methods where we can have alternating luminaires, we can dim lights, we can have alternating light fixtures illuminated. And there's some exceptions for that, but they're not required in daylight zones with daylight responsive controls that comply with the next section of the code. And again, some of the options that I talked about, controlling all lamps or luminaires, dual switching of alternate rows, middle luminaires independently of the outer lamps, and switching each other or every other light fixture. Again, you need to refer to the code section for any type of additional exceptions for this. It's a little bit lengthy to place in here. Daylight responsive controls, making sure that we can reduce the amount of energy that's consumed when we have those daylight areas that are close by large groupings of glazing, making sure that we are able to reduce our lighting requirements or lighting draw, the amount of energy we use for illumination within the building, when we can take advantage of that natural daylight. And the daylight zone is defined as a portion of the building's interior floor area that is illuminated by natural light. And here are some of the exceptions when we talk about daylight responsive controls and where they may not be required or where they would be required. So again, we need to refer to that code section, or we'll follow up with the commercial lighting presentation, which goes deeper in depth to all of these chapters and how this is accomplished and laid out. We have interior lighting power requirements. Following a prescriptive path. And this is complies with section with the total connected lighting power calculations. And just be aware that we'll be able to go over that in the future, but there are interior lighting power requirements that need to be met, as well as exterior lighting requirements. Now, there's some exceptions for exterior lighting when it comes to historical aspects of the building, safety aspects, and signage as well, and certain emergency conditions for lighting. We have in section 406, C406, the requirements are not included in the SPS 361. So that would be the additional efficiency package options that you see within the energy conservation code on the commercial side. So moving on, prior to the total building performance, any of those additional efficiency options are not part of the SPS 363 or 361 through 366. C407 addresses total building performance, and this references C407 requires that total building energy use or cost to be equal or less than the standard reference as required in section 401.2 item 3. And when we use ComCheck for this, because we can get in depth in ComCheck in the lighting program as well, is putting all the light fixtures in and so forth to determine whether that building meets for the building thermal envelope or lighting compliance section. So ComCheck is the option that will allow us to quantify and qualify for that building envelope or lighting compliance. 407.2 are some mandatory requirements of the code. It's telling us the section of the criteria 402.5, 403.2, C404, and 405 can be met. The requirements of 403.2.7 are not required to be demonstrated as a means of the compliance of this section. Again, that's something that's not included in the SPS. So some of the mandatory requirements refer to those sections of the code again to make sure that we're following all the mandatory requirements. System commissioning is not included. So any chapter anything you reference to system commissioning, you may have seen in the code book, the IECC code book under section C408. That section is not included in the SPS 361 to 366. Some sections of moving on to additions to structures. So when we get into section 5 of chapter 5 of the code, we get into additions, alterations, repairs. This is just telling us, their SPS 363.0502 is telling us that the same opaque assembly tables for fenestration and insulation values pertain to additions as they do to new construction, and as well as the air leakage section in our air barrier and insulation inspection component tables are the same as the new construction. So if you're looking at this section of the SPS 363, it's just referencing back, telling us that those same sections pertain. But be aware, referencing back to the 2009 tables. That's important. Make sure that we're following that proper fenestration table, because there is a difference between the 09 and the 2015. When we look at additions in general, this is an addition to an existing building system or portion shall conform to the provisions of the code, as long as those provisions relate to new construction that doesn't require the unaltered portion of the existing building or building system to comply with the code. So when we're talking about additions, we need to make sure to understand that we don't have to bring the remainder of the building up to code requirements. And that addition should be deemed to comply if that addition alone complies, or if the existing building and the addition comply with the code as a single building. So there's a prescriptive compliance for additions, and that would be chapters 502 or sections 502.2.1 through 502.2.6.2. Moving on to alterations. An alteration to the building, the structure shall comply with the requirements of the code for new construction. Those alterations shall be such that the existing building or structure is no less conforming to the provisions of the code. So we can't make a change to the building which causes the building to perform less than it did prior to the start of that alteration. Those alterations obviously need to follow the code as it relates to the provisions for new construction, without requiring that altered sections of the building to comply. So any alteration to a building should not cause the building to perform worse than it did prior to that alteration. And here's a list of alterations. What an alteration is: storm windows, surface applied film, existing wall cavities or ceiling cavities, floor cavities exposed during construction. They need to be provided they're filled with insulation. Yeah. Roof construction, roof recovery, air barrier, specifically when we have roof recovering. And again, alterations to the lighting or luminaires in the space to less than 50% of the existing fixtures, that the alterations don't increase the installed interior lighting power. So again, alterations making sure that we don't increase energy consumption by changing the structure in any way. We can do a change in space conditioning. That space is any non-conditioned or low energy space that is altered to become conditioned space is required to brought into full compliance with the code. So everything previous to out the code chapter would then be required, or previous in this presentation would then be required for this alteration. And again, new building envelopes, as I mentioned earlier, are required to, or as part of the alteration, are required to meet the requirements, are required to meet section 4021 through 4025 for the building thermal envelope. So any new construction is required to meet as well. Repairs to a building need to be done in compliance with 5013 in this section 504. The repair part should be considered part a repair, or part of the repair of a damaged component should not be subject to the requirements of alterations in this chapter. And just be careful on the wording. These, again, if we have a question on the definition of that, we can go to the chapter 2 to find a definition of what an alteration, addition, or repair is. Your routine maintenance, something that it's an ordinary repair, is exempt from a permit for the most part. Excuse me. And just to be aware, just be cognizant of what a repair is versus an alteration to the structure itself. So these are some examples of repairs: glass only replacements and existing sashes, roof repairs, air barrier repairs, the existing doors being repaired, whether it's from the separating exterior from interior space, repairs to lighting fixtures where the bulb and ballast or both, or the existing luminaire, are replaced, provided it doesn't increase, again, the interior lighting power. So any repair that's not going to increase energy usage it falls under this section. The change in occupancy. Your space is undergoing change in occupancy or use that would result in a demand for either fossil fuel or electrical energy shall comply with this code. And that comes back to tables 405, 1 and 2, as well as pertaining to the installed lighting wattage, requiring section 405.4. To make sure that our heating and cooling equipment meets with the requirements when we have a change in occupancy, provided that we don't have a change in occupancy. If we have an increase in a demand, we need to comply with the section, the code 505.1. And then finally, at the end of 363, the 600 section talks about reference standards, again, from the different standards throughout the testing procedure. So we have some upcoming training in 2025. January 23rd, we'll be at the La Crosse Area Builders doing an infiltration and air sealing session for residential construction. January 29th, you see residential HVAC sizing, manual JS&D. It's a 1-hour virtual presentation. February 12th, residential heating and insulation. February 20th, introduction to residential air sealing. March 12th will be a 3-hour virtual presentation where we take a deeper dive into the Residential Energy Code, or the UDC. March 26th will be that 3-hour session, as I mentioned earlier, on large commercial buildings and mechanical and lighting. And we'll talk more in depth of the sections that we just glazed over with this, just to give you the overview of this particular section of the IECC, Energy Conservation Code. So that 3-hour session will go deeper into the individual sections of daylighting controls requirements. We'll get into economizers and various heating controls, as well as deeper into the fenestration and building requirements of the building thermal envelope itself, interpreting those charts and how those details are applied. These registration links will be advertised at the following website, wienergycodes.com or .org. You can go there soon to find the upcoming training, or you'll be getting emails most likely from our advertising department on the upcoming training. So please register for those links if you're interested. All these presentations will include continuing education units with those. The residential code or program last week and this commercial code was just an introduction, an overview, and with no CEUs, but these will definitely have CEUs applied to those. If you have, again, code questions, you can go to this website and get some additional information regarding the Wisconsin Energy Code Technical Advisor Program, and reach out to Robbie or myself if you have code questions, and we'll be able to hopefully get those answered for you, get back to you. Also, if you have anything specific that you wish to have a seminar or webinar on, please let us know. We're looking for topics of that are desired around the state. If there are things that are needed, whether it's commercial or residential, as it pertains to the Energy Conservation Code, we'll be glad to come up with a presentation and present that to help fill that need or that desire. And then following throughout March and April, the following months after that, we'll have additional programming, or additional presentations, at least 2 a month. And you'll be seeing us around the state as well over the next through January and February at various conferences. And I apologize for the speed at which we went through this. Wanted to make sure it just touched on the main chapters of the code. I don't want to go too far in depth because we could spend hours on individual subchapters of the commercial code, and we can do that as if desired. But just wanted to make you aware that there are changes or amendments to the IECC 2015 based on the SPS 363. So please be very careful referencing those sections of the IECC as it's written, ensuring that you take those amendments or deletions or alterations into account when you're looking at the code. So if there are no questions at this time, you can always reach out to us with questions. I'm going to give you a couple minutes of your day back. It's 2 till. I thank you for your attendance. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at one of those email addresses, and be sure to download the handouts for the webinar if you would. That way you have that information. And look for upcoming advertising from PSD, as well as Mia and Slipstream for the advertising for the programs. And with that, just want to wish you a happy holidays and enjoy your time off for those of you who will be off over the next week or so. Take care and hope to see you at the next session. Thank you.